Hello everyone and welcome to a new video from Your Overwatch. I'm Eddie the Chump and today we'll be covering 5 misconceptions about solo queue matchmaking. Now as we know, solo queue can sometimes throw up interesting challenges, and prime amongst these is when your team seem either unwilling or incapable of playing standard or to meta. One of the biggest hurdles in ranking up is letting go of how you should play, as many times you'll find yourself in a situation with people who make non-meta picks or just overload your comp with DPS, etc. In that situation, trying to force standard play like 2-2-2 can actually hurt you, and what's required is to be a bit more creative and perhaps play non-standard yourself in an effort to synergize with what you do actually have. With that perspective in mind, let's take a look at some of the most common misconceptions surrounding solo queue. Lucio's speed boost. Now in a coordinated environment, Lucio's speed amp is one of the most crucial abilities in the game, be it moving a death ball into position, overwhelming their enemy, or as a defensive option after losing a team fight to regroup effectively with your team on their respawn. We all know the value of this ability. However, if you find yourself in a game where people are playing non-committally, which in solo queue can be quite often, you can find yourself having little value. Even if the opportunity is clear and you call it out, if people don't go with you or take advantage, you can end up having very little impact on the game. Remember, solo queue is not the perfect world. If your team insists on poking endlessly, then it doesn't matter how many times you try and speed boost them through that choke. If they won't go, they won't go. A lot of the time, you have to decide what hero you can have the most impact with at any given time. If your team are poking, then help them decisively win that poke battle, instead of trying to enforce standard play on people who aren't interested in doing so. You need a Ryne. In much the same vein as Lucio's speed amp, having to have a Ryne shield is a common misconception. There are other ways of playing the game, and other tanks facilitate different playstyles. If you have teammates who aren't taking advantage of your Ryne shield, or if the enemy has heroes that can basically completely ignore your shielding, a switch to something less standard might be in order. What is true, however, is that you cannot try to play in a standard front-facing death ball without a Ryne shield against a team that does have one. That will lead to disaster. If you're playing Ryneless, you need to open up multiple angles to subvert their shielding and split them. If you try and play a shield battle with no shield, you're gonna have a bad time. But the idea here is, instead of subscribing to the "this is how you play" mentality, you have to get used to evaluating what you can synergize with based on what's actually in front of you, and not some preconceived notion of proper play. I'll let you in on a little secret. This is something I particularly struggle with, so you're not alone. This doesn't come from a feeling of superiority, rather it comes from bitter experience. Solo queue is a completely different world from an organized 6-stack environment, and as such you cannot assume the same principles apply in every situation. You need 2-2-2 or 2 healers. This misconception again comes from a good place. People think that solo healer comps are in principle a bad idea. And sure, against an organized team playing 110% meta against you in a very standard way, it probably is in most situations. But this is solo queue, brother. Those rules don't apply. If you're flexing, for example, say perhaps you're the Lucio from the earlier example, and you're getting very little value because your team aren't interested in exploiting your speed amp timings, then swapping off to another hero can be a viable option. Be that a DPS or another tank, it doesn't really matter as long as the pick you make is confronting a challenge you're facing. Taking Roadhog to crush the enemy shield, or an offensive Mei to isolate one of the enemy tanks in a poke battle. Whatever play you try and make, if you're one of the healers, that'll leave your team with solo heals. But here's the thing, are you getting stuck in a poke battle because you don't have enough healing? No, probably not. Is that defensive Genji getting away with absolute non-meta murder? Well, a Swift Winston pick should rock that boat. The point is, you have to actually analyze the game and understand what's going on rather than falling back on preconceived notions of how you should play. Don't overextend. Now, this concept is going to be tricky to navigate. On one hand, overextending in the wrong context is tantamount to throwing, but in some other circumstances, overextending can really work. So what's the difference? Well, a bad case would be when people are extending past a team fight they've just won on defense of, say, a capture point map, for example. Let's say Hanamura for old time's sake. If you win the poke at the choke and wipe most of the attackers and attempt to chase down the stragglers to lengthen their collective respawn, you might run the risk of losing a key defensive hero while also being at a massive spawn disadvantage. In essence, overextending is one of the only ways that you can trade being in a favoured position into being a man down for the next team fight in an instant. Now, a lot of the time that happens because people get frag hungry, or they believe they see an opportunity to win the next fight before it's even begun, and stay too long in an exposed position without support. However, as Liam pointed out in his excellent video from a few days ago, sometimes it's important to take space in an aggressive manner on King of the Hill, to ensure you don't just sit and wait passively to get ulted into oblivion on the point. The key here is, again, you have to be aware of the actual context unfolding in front of you and not rely on simplified, misconceived ideas of what good play is. Not enough damage. This misconception is often mistaken for something else, which is poor focus fire, which when you consider the solo queue environment is quite understandable. One of the biggest problems with being disorganized is that people can get drawn into 6 1v1s all across the map, with the end result being that nothing ever dies. Then you'll often hear this refrain, "We don't have enough damage!" Or, the other context you'll hear it, is when say your comp has maybe a Roadhog and a Soldier with the rest being tanks and healers. People assume based off the 2-2-2 misconception that you'll need at least one more DPS. That's not entirely true, as Roadhog is absolutely massive in the current meta and can function as one of the best burst DPS heroes in the game. What might be happening however is that you're playing against a tank heavy lineup yourself, so Roadhog is likely hooking one of them anyway. If your team doesn't pounce on that hooked diva, she can easily get away and be healed in absolutely no time by Ana and her totally balanced kit. If that's happening, then perhaps a more DPS lopsided comp is actually needed. Maybe a Reaper, who despite what people think, hasn't had his ability to completely delete things at close range removed. As with the other misconceptions, the answer is to actually identify what's going wrong. Conclusion. The truth is, you are often better off doing simple things for yourself to make an impact rather than trying to play too standard if your teammates aren't interested in or capable of doing so. The thing about solo queue is that its playing experience is so variable that it can range from everyone communicating and building a meta comp to a free-for-all all DPS no healer slugfest. It's down to you to analyse what's going wrong and take measures to fix it. The whole experience can be so unorthodox that sticking to preconceived notions of how to play can doom you to loss after loss and endless frustration. This is a lesson I have learnt the hard way. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like. If you'd like us to cover anything specific, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Also, please follow the Your Overwatch Twitter, it's where you can find updates about new videos and streams. I've been Eddie the Chump, and until next time,